The night fort had a way of swallowing sound. Stone drank the wind, the empty wells drank the light, and the snow itself fell as if mindful that footsteps here belonged to other ages and better men. Men in black muttered prayers when they drew lots that sent them to watch this ruin. The ones who laughed did not laugh long, not after they laid a hand upon the ancient iron of its gates and felt ice bite bone through glove and wool. The ones who sang did not sing by the second night. Harith Shai took the third watch beside the well because no one else would stand by it and call down, "Who goes there?" into the dark that led beneath the wall. Even a jape will scrape the skin off your soul if you play it often enough in that place. Yet Harith had been a mummer's boy in Maidenpool, and a mummer's boy learns to bow to the scene at hand. The torches had gone out one by one. The last flame had guttered early to a knot of red, the smoke raising a finger that seemed to be pointing at him. Snow drifted in upon the stone lip and skated in the draft that breathed out of the well like a thing sleeping under a blanket. He whispered, "I am not afraid because mummers are always lying." From the well came a sound that was not breath. It was not rope against stone, not water, not a rat. It was a voice as old as burned wood. It said, "Harith Shai," and that was the worst of it, that it had his name. He did not run. He should have. The old places make men brave or mad, and sometimes it is the same thing. He reached into the well with his torch and held its orange stub over the black. A face appeared where no face should be, white and ridged and creased like a root dug from winter ground. The nose had fallen away or been carved so close to the bone that the bone showed through, but one eye was red as a coal. The other, a milk-white pearl. Behind it, darkness and a hint of flowing water that cast back whispers in every voice Harith had loved or feared. "Stand," the old man said. Throat sound like ravens settling to roost. "Stand fast, brother." Harith had never been brave. He stood. "Who?" "A brother," came the answer. Once and again. "I know the words still. I know the stone." The red eye kindled as if the torch lived in it now. "If the wall would yet have me, the wall will open. Call none. Draw steel against none. Hide no fire." He lifted a hand, and it was a branch. It was a hand of bone with skin thin as paper. It was both, and the smell of wet wood rose like a prayer. "I am Brynden Rivers." The name meant nothing to Harith, but the oath did. He cleared his throat, and the well's mouth threw the sound back at him sevenfold, each echo another watchman long dead. He said the words, and the dark stone thirsted at them, and somewhere deep below, stone moved, as if the black gate itself drew a breath after sleeping 100 lifetimes. It said, "Then pass." When Brynden Rivers rose from the last stair, the breath of the night fort gusted far down in the well and put out Harith's light. The old man did not need it. He could see the boy by the beat of his frightened heart, hear the shape of the tower by the way snow stacked in the cracks. He had known this place as a younger man, a stern boy, a sharpened reed in a king's reed bed, and again as an older man, a sinner sent to keep vows at the end of the world. He had watched torches sink in this well once. He had flung a corpse down it once, because the dead do not mind the cold. All this he knew because the stone remembered and had given up those memories to him like leaves falling. Harith licked his lips. Are you of the watch?" "I was Lord Commander." Harith tried the words on his tongue, found them too big, and swallowed. "We should take you to Castle Black, my lord. The Lord Commander is a boy with a wolf," said Brynden Rivers. "He dreams behind red eyes. He has taken the dark road for a time." The old man tilted his head as if listening to snow. "The wall has lost a piece of its heart, but not all. We will not trouble Castle Black tonight. Tell no man you saw me. Say the night fort spoke. Men heed walls. They do not heed old bones." Harith tried not to stare at the branch fingers. The old man smelled like the gods would in storm. "Aim, lord. Will you?" "South," said Brynden. His mouth split like parchment over snow. "Home." He walked without sound, a shadow that made other shadows step aside. The ravens found him as the wind found the gaps in the keeps and murmured thin songs as if they too had needed a word to remember their names. By the time Harith remembered his duty and stumbled back toward the tower to wake the others, Bryndon Rivers had gone into the trees, and then into the trees, and then the north had him again. Far to the north, beneath a hill that had forgotten how to be anything but a hill, the boy with the wolf sat with his hand upon the pale stone and listened to the slow sap drip. The pale roots had made little nests round his fingers in the night. He had not pulled away. He did not always remember which fingers were his own. He remembered a wolf's belly steaming where snow clung and the taste of blood when meat tore. And he remembered his father's hand at his hair and the rasp of a whetstone in the sweet iron of the God's Wood pool at Winterfell. He remembered riding upon Hodor's back when the world had been wide and trivial, and his legs had been something other than a dream. Leaf stood in the entrance and looked like a boy or a girl, except that her eyes did not hold human surprise anymore. They held the old surprise, the one the forest had when a river changed its bed. "He is gone," she said softly. Bran's hand tightened upon the root. Sap bled up like red tears in the old faces. "I know," he said. "He left pieces of himself behind. He always does." "Mira stirred by the dying fire, skin pale as fallen birch under her furs, hair a dark net hung with watershine from the cave. "We can't go after him," she said before he could ask it, because Bran was a boy, still, and boys chased. "We followed him the first time and the snows cracked our bones." Bran turned his head. The roots had taught him patience. They had not yet taught him how to bear the ache in his legs when he looked down and saw blankets where bright-fastened leather had once been. "He went home," he said. And even as he said it, he saw it, in the thin runnels of time that threaded through the weirwood like silver fish. He saw an old stone well, and a boy who was almost a man and an oath that could never warm itself. He felt the slap of winter upon an albino cheek, and the drag of a long cloak across stone that had seemed giants. "Why?" Mira asked. Leaf did not ask, because the children do not ask rivers why they run downhill. Bran tasted the answer like iron. "To make me a crown," he said, and he would have laughed, except that laughter was a thing that comes easier to legs than to roots. Jojen, asleep even when he was awake, murmured something and turned. The fire snapped one last time and understood that it had been heard. Gray water moved where other lands did not. Howland Reed sat cross-legged upon the woven mat, the marsh steam in his hair and the small green frog that had chosen his shoulder considering him gravely with a single wise eye. His daughter had been gone so long that he had begun to dream of her only as a little brown hand in his own, but the dreams had changed. They had grown moss. In them the godswood trees turned their faces sideways to look upon him, and the water opened like doors. He smoothed the bark he had pulled down from the heart tree. The lily knife bit zooming arcs, and the bark coil the size of his palm unrolled with a pale whisper. His hands were quick. He had cut boats from rootwood with those hands, and men besides. He had bound wounds and unbound oaths. He had carried Eddard Stark upon those hands once when he had fallen, and would not admit to it. His son stood with a spear whose tip was black glass. The boy had his mother's eyes, and his father's patience and a Crannog man's way of letting the world come to him. "Father," Jory said. Howland Reed blew the dust away and pressed the bark to the wet mat. The red traced upon it had dried brown, but it would bleed when it drank the marsh again. He did not need to look at it to know what it showed. He had seen the reed crown woven on the bark and on the water and in the mouth of a white-faced raven. "We go to Winterfell," he said. "Under whose banners?" his son asked, wary. The boy knew banners were like flies. They came, they bit, they hived off into marsh after a while. "Under the leaves," said Howland, and then he turned the bark so his son could see it. And the boy stopped breathing, just a little, as men do when a secret stands up and introduces itself. At White Harbor, the bells tolled for the tide and for a wedding, although the wedding would never come. The sea hauled itself up the river as if grateful to be cut from salt by the city's stone teeth. In the great hall of the new castle, Wyman Manderley sat like a hill with thoughts for sheep. His fingers were sausage fat and clever. He could count and he could laugh, and he could talk of pies until small men forgot that he was an old wolf fat as winter and more patient. He was hearing 2 petitions and weighing 3 trezens when the raven thumped upon the sill. It should not have been there, he thought. He had cut the perches a long time ago to make certain ravens kept to the rookery and messages passed through maester's hands that he might count the number of fingers on the maester's hands. But the bird cocked its head and lifted 1 foot and dropped a thing like a loop of red river root upon the ledge. The root unfurled to show a strip of pale wood with red notches cut into its face. The maester made a disgruntled noise when Wyman took it first. "We wrote to the Lord Commander. We wrote." "The river writes back," Wyman said gently. He made a space on the board before him with 2 fingers and laid the bark where the light collected. Then he sent the petitioners away and counted his friends. He still had friends. A lord grows friends as a winter tree grows birds. Some are there for the berries, some for the bear, some for the luck of a wind that cut their wings and made them fall upon the branch. Wyman had collected the kind that stay even when there are no berries. He touched the red notches and smiled, because the red came away and stained his finger. He knew that red. He had cut his thumb upon a weirwood root once as a boy in the Godswood at Winterfell, and the root had licked his blood like milk. He said nothing. But in the kitchens, the ovens were stoked to a hotter hunger, and the men who knew how to bake a fish into another shape were called. And in the harbor, a slender ship took 4 loads of salt pork, and 1 load of men in brown and green who sang when they moved their oars. Roose Bolton disliked wind. Wind moved things he could not see and froze perfumes before he could name them. He liked stillness and the little sounds a knife made when it found a resting place. At Winterfell there was no stillness. Snow scratched every window. Mice sang in the walls. Women's whispering pooled in the corners. He took the Godswood when he wanted stillness, although he did not like trees either. Trees hid men. Men hid knives. But the Godswood had a face, and men respect faces. The heart tree was old, and no one knew from what seed. The mouth had not been carved by any hand Roose could name. Perhaps it had been carved by ice. Perhaps the gods carved themselves out of boredom one day, when the sun stood still too long. The face did not look at him. Roose would have known if it had looked at him, the way a man knows when a Connie's eye has finally found the hawk that has been there all afternoon. "You are busy," he said to the heatless air. He did not offer a prayer. Boltons were not fools. Snow sifted down through black boughs, and where it touched the old leaves it melted as if the tree were warm. Roose watched that and did not think of anything. Thinking is putting water into a bowl. The water takes the bowl's shape. Roose preferred his thoughts unshaped. That way the men who looked at his eyes could only see their own faces. Somewhere a raven stirred. The Godswood held a little house for them, set high in the elm. The black birds had come since the snows began. More each day, like a rumor gathering fat. Roose had ordered their culling twice. Each time the bodies vanished, and no one would say who had taken them. The dogs would not go into that wood now. Ramsay had tried to haul one by the collar, and the beast had snapped at his face. The first thing that had ever refused him that had lived to refuse it. "Busy," Roose repeated, and let the word out on his breath to see how the cold broke it. He had once cut a throat, and the blood had come out thin as wine. He thought of that now, and found it soothing. When the raven settled upon the face of the heart tree, it did not move like a bird. It stepped down the white like a man walking. Its feet did not slip, and its head cocked the way old men cock their heads when their ears have lied too long, and they rely on eyes and smell to make up. The Godswood stank of old sap and fox. The bird stank of old smoke. Roose had never had to learn to be brave. He made a courtesy. "My lord." The raven laughed. It was a small sound, like kindling, like contempt. Then it said, in the cracked voice of a harp strung with hair, "You are not a lord." Ramsay came later, in the way that bad weather follows a small pleasant day you mistrusted. He was flushed with winter and had bits of dog in his beard. He had brought the pink cloak that made him smile, because he had learned early that color was the only thing winter could not abide. "Father," he said, and he always said it as if he were testing the word on his teeth to see if it would crack. The phrase quarrel over who leads a sortie. Someone must be told to go first. I said I'd tell you so you could make it in order. Roos's eyes went to the white face, then to his son. "A sortie where?" "East Gate. They say it's drifted wrong and will hold a man up to his chest." "Nay, and Hanor." "Tell them they may go together," Roos said, and would have smiled if it had not been wasteful. Sons of lords, Walder, do not have to quarrel over first steps. Ramsay's eyes darted about the wood. He was a dog catching a scent with his eyes and being made mad by the trick. "You hide in a wood, father. You never hide. The men will say you are touched." "Men," Roos said, and within it he put a long sigh that never reached the air. "If they are fools, they must be hunted," Ramsay said, which was his solution for most things, and Roos thought of telling him about the raven, but did not. "Men are hunted by dogs. Dogs are hunted by hunger. Hunger is hunted by winter." He supposed in time he would let winter hunt Ramsay. Across a frozen leagues-wide waste, Stannis Baratheon stood by a table old as the land and traced his sword tip over a crooked line. The ink had made rivers there. The snow had made other rivers since. The men's footsteps turned them to mud, and the sword had no patience for any of it. "Crofter's village," Stannis said. "A king in a field." Elizane Mormont had broad hands, woman strong, and no memory of fear. She stood at his shoulder and shook her head. "You can't eat a title," she told him. "And your horses can't eat yours." She tapped the map with 2 fingers. "You have 5 days of grain, 10 of meat if the men agree to chew fat. But they'll argue the way men do when snow makes them slow and stupid, and you have rocks." She tapped again. "And the Mother's Mercy. That brown creek, the color of what it's called. You'll hold if the winds keep angry. If they sweeten, the snow turns to rain and the ground's your enemy." "Me?" Stannis did not look up. "I've more enemies than I have ground." A raven came then, and Stannis' mouth tightened because ravens carried both news and pretexts, and men were always falling in love with pretexts when their wives got fat and the children went hungry. The bird's beak struck the board beside the map. It laid a loop of something pale, thin root maybe, then shook its feathers and said, in a voice that made the hairs on men's necks stand up one by one like men called by name, "Lord of Dragonstone." Elizane's hand moved, but Stannis put his sword across it. He did not like men or birds or gods who tried to make his blood run in any other direction than he willed. "Speak," he told the bird, to save time. The raven, the thing inside the raven, obeyed. It told a story out of the north, out of a time before iron learned it could float on blood. It spoke of a crown woven from bough and bone, not worn upon the brow but upon the heart. It spoke of a king chosen by the trees, not to sit a throne but to stand a watch. It spoke of a boy in a cave who put down his name and picked up a forest. "King," Stannis said when it had done. As if the word were a rotten tooth, he prodded with his tongue. "The North has one king, and he is not made by trees." Elizane said nothing. She had learned that kings who have nothing in their bellies must be given space to instruct themselves. When the raven left, she said, "When I was a girl, my mother taught me to put my ear to a tree when the wind is loud. The tree will tell you which way men will walk tomorrow. You can say, 'Trees are fools,' but you are here, your grace, and not a fool. And the letter my cousin sent you had a wolf upon it, and a child's hand." She took her hand from the table and flexed it as if she had carried something heavy to him. "Bear Island knows no king but the king in the north, whose name is Stark," she said quietly. "We wrote it to you because it was true. If the trees say there's another king, well, perhaps they wish to say there is a Stark again." "Names," Stannis said. "Always names. Call a tree a king and you will have crowns of sap." But he looked south anyway. Send you to watch this crowning then. You will look at it with bare eyes. If there is a boy, Alison said, now matter of fact, I will bring back something of him. Bring me fealty, Stannis said. Bring me the name that the men of the North know how to speak without spitting. He turned back to his map to prove that maps still mattered. When men went one way, the marsh went another. Greywater slid from its beds and took reeds and spearwives, and a small fleet of low, clever boats. The river was a rumor to men with roads. It became a fact when it ate a horse. The Crannogmen's oars did not splash, not once, and their boats smelt of the green things they were made of. Howland Reed sat in the leading boat and watched the sky for white spokes like fingers, because one learns as much from the sky as from water. He saw flocks breaking and mending and breaking again, as if one mind troubled them and then another took it away. The reeds whispered names to him as he slid past, the names of men and of cattle and of the spaces between them. Reed folk know how to hear the names of things without learning to say them, and sometimes that means they seem foolish to those who shout a name over a field and think they own it. He heard other names too. He heard Benjen in the ripple under the bank. He heard Jory in the seethe beside a submerged stump. He heard Eddard when the wind couldn't decide itself. Father, his son said, using the speaking name, the one that sits lightly and does not cut your lip when you say it. If the boy is crowned, what then? Do the men of the North kneel to trees? They kneel to memory, Howland said. His face did not change. He had learned long ago that face and heart should not share water. The trees are where memory lives. In the South, they kneel to writs because they have men who can read them. We kneel where we have read since before iron. His son thought on that because he was a patient boy. And what if the South says no? Then old oaths will be woken. Some of those oaths sleep on benches in castles. Some sleep under stones. Some sleep in men. Howland's boat slid into a creek so narrow it would have turned away a river. The marsh parted. The world makes a road for those who know which road to ask for. They will all wake. Oaths are louder than trumpets when they stand. On the hill in the cave, Bran slept inside Summer and inside the tree, and sometimes inside Hodor, because habit is a kind of love. When he went deep, he did not always remember to return. He took the weirwood's roots for veins, and the hill's granite for bones, and the black water in the caverns for thought. When he came back to himself, he came slow, like a thing thawing. "Do not go too far," Leaf said, not scolding. The children did not scold. If a bird flew into a branch and broke its neck, the branch took note and did not change. If you go too far, you will forget what it is to come back. "I know how to come back," Bran said. Although sometimes it was true only because Mira said his name aloud over and over, until the syllable itself tied a rope around him and pulled him up. He did not say that aloud because Mira already knew it, and speaking a thing twice is cruel when it is hard. Jojen coughed. He did not cough like a boy, but like a man who had been given too many winters in one, and had found the bottom of them all. "He is gone to make a king," he whispered to the roof. "He has gone to unmake one." He was talking to the whetstone. Jojen spoke to everything. "Rest," Mira said to him. She mended the fletching on an arrow with fingers that might have stitched a net or a wound. She had learned to be very still. The cave made stillness like a kiln makes pots. If he wants a king, he could have taught one where he sits. "He did," Jojen whispered. His eyes opened and were old for one heartbeat, older than Leaf's. "He was making one when he pulled you out of the snow, Mira. He was making one when he sent your father to the tower with Eddard Stark. It takes a while to season some woods." Bran put his forehead to the root and felt his own face heat, though it was not his forehead and not a face. He slid. The wood took him. The leagues went by like the lengths of his arm, which he had left somewhere back in a bed of skins. He threaded rivers in the memory of rivers, house gods and hoarfrost, hoot and whisper, and the boom that ice makes when the night is so cold that sound cannot live in it. He found the godswood at Winterfell, and put his eyes into the eyes there, and saw a man with a soft face that had never learned to soften, and a boy behind him with a grin that had not learned anything. He saw ravens, a patient flood. He saw his father in every shadow for one cruel second, and then saw only snow again. He pushed deeper, past the face of the tree where men came to tell secrets and ask lies. He felt the black of the pool and the iron of the greatsword that had knelt over it once, and the heat of a forge. He felt the ghosts of wolves, warm and quick. He spoke then. The wood is not a throat. It is better. When he spoke, he did not need a tongue. He remembered his father's soft prayer voice and tried it. He said, "Come." Men came. They came poorly and late and angry at the cold. They came with excuses. A man makes excuses the way a tree makes leaves. There are too many, and they are all the same in winter. They came because they had dreamed of wolves. They came because the marsh sent boats where no water had been yesterday. They came because a heavy lord with a sweet voice had mentioned that pies taste better with salt, and salt tastes better with oath, and oath tastes best with victory. They came because they had nothing left to sell but their oaths, and someone had offered fair coin for those. They came to a ruined castle that pretended to still be a house and a god's wood that remembered everything it had ever watched. Howland Reed came with bare feet and a reed flute that had learned to play rain. Elizane Mormont came with an axe, and the look of someone who would cut the cold in half and take the warmer piece. Men from White Harbor came with knuckles white as fish bellies over spear hafts. There were umbers with 2 banners and 2 tempers, one fast to rage, one slow to loyalty. There were Riswells with their good-breeding faces and their horse sense that told them the wind was changing. There were Mound clansmen with 24 words among them, half of which meant. There were Crannogmen who did not look at men because they preferred to look at water. There were old women with prayer beads made of tiny polished bones, and a boy with hair the color of wet autumn leaf who kept his hand on the hilt of a sword he had not earned yet. There were 3 women from Barrowton wrapped in dozen shawls and grief like armor. There was Lady Dustin, red mouth a cut of blood in winter, eyes that should have been blue if there had been any mercy left in the world, which there was not. Wyman Manderley came last, because he had sent others first to see whether the way would bite. When he came, he made a joke of the snow and bowed so low to the heart tree that it seemed he would not come up again. Men murmured when he did, because rumor had him baiting 2 kings with the same pie, and men admired that sort of thing even as they ruined themselves in envy of it. They stood beneath the face, in a silence that made the trees remember they had been other things once. And at last Howland put his hand upon the pale bark and said in the thin voice of a man who has learned to speak softly in places where loud words wake too much. "We are here." A raven dropped from an elm. It landed upon the head of an old statue that had lost its sword and its nose, and looked for all the world like it wished it had lost its duty as well. The bird's eye burned and men flinched. Lady Dustin did not. "We are all fools together," she said. "Well, a fool loves a ceremony." "Not this one," said the raven. And that was the moment at which even the men who had not believed they believed felt their faith take a step back from them to see how it fit. Elizane Mormont raised her chin, and men who had not fancied kneeling found their knees thinking of it. The bird hopped down upon a low bough, and out of it stepped an old man who had been a young man for too long and an old one for even longer. He did not so much change as explain himself. The ravens behind him came closer until the black of them was one black, and the sound of them was one breath. Roose Bolton lifted his head and went pale, which is a strange trick for a pale man. He did not move. Bryndon Rivers put his hand upon the tree. The weirwood seemed pleased to have him the way water is pleased when you fall into it at just the right temperature. "Here now," he said, and men heard because the wood wanted it so, and because, too, they had brought their ears for a reason, and this felt like it. "You have a king in the south, and a king at his camp, and a king in half the halls you have built inside your own skulls. None of them will learn the words winter asks, and winter does not care about their crowns. Winter is a god whose only prayer is breath." "We know winter," Horsebane Umber said, which was brave, and Crowfoot Umber gave him a look as if to say, "Hush, you put salt on your own wound." You know hunger, the old man said. Hunger is winter's hand. You have shaken it. It is polite, once. Then it takes fingers. He turned his head. The shape of his mouth suggested he had once smiled like a knife. The forest remembers a thing you have forgotten. You had kings in the north. Before them you had someone else. The forest remembers the men who listened when stones argued. It remembers when a man did not say, mine, but ours, and meant the living and the dead and the going to be. Lady Dustin scoffed. Green singers and bed tales. We are not children. There are no children, Brynden Rivers said. There are only the old and their memory. Some of the old have leaves, some do not. He touched the tree's face. It did not move. He said, the north should make the north again. Not a king upon a chair, a king upon a root. Phew. That was Wyman, suddenly quiet. The one who is listening. A wind came across the godswood and shook the old leaves as if to see which were ready to fall. Snow went sideways and caught in the boughs, and then the boughs shook and the snow fell again, and the second fall was blood red where it struck the trunk. Men gasped. It was not blood. It was sap where the bark had cracked, and what ran there ran slower than blood and longer. It made red fingers. Those fingers twined in the thin loop of pale root that Brynden held, and when he lifted it to show them its shape, a murmur ran among them as if the wind had learned to speak men's names. It was a crown. It was a hoop of weirwood twigs and something older. The red drained toward the nodes and back again. Eliza Mormont put her hand to her heart, as if a horn had sounded. Howland Reed knelt. Others followed, slow, the way men kneel when their minds have gone ahead, and their bones have to find them. Lady Dustin did not, but her eyes had gone strange, as if a memory had stood up in her and asked to be heard. Ramsay laughed. He laughed the way a dog laughs when there is no meat and plenty of bone. A crown, he said. And the head to wear it is where? Up a tree? He had a knife in his hand without ever having needed to move to take it. I will carve you a head if you like. I grew quite good at carving in the Dreadfort. Brynden did not look at him. He looked at the tree and said, in a voice that was not his voice any more than the wind is the pines, Brandon. Bran had been listening. He had been inside the eye of an owl, and inside the heart tree's pale wood, and inside the memory of a stone that Eddard Stark had leant upon with a tired back once, when his hands had still been clean. When Brynden called his name, he did not come. He did not know how to come. He was already there. He spoke, and the boughs leaned. I am here, he said, through leaves, through bark, through the small heartbeats of 100 winter wrens, nesting where snow had not found them yet. He felt Mira's hand close upon his shoulder across a dozen leagues. He felt Hodor's slow contentment, and the way summer's ear flicked when a flea jumped. He felt Jojen cough. He felt the cave breathe and the hill hold him. He felt the north like a beast waking under him. I hear you, he said. I dreamed you. Wyman Manderley lowered his fat head until the snow banked on his neck. Eliza Mormont thumped the haft of her axe hard against the earth 3 times and then put the axe down. The Umbers went to a knee with bad grace and better hearts. The mountain men sprawled where they had been standing and called it kneeling. The Crannogmen put their hands in the water and did not move again. Lady Dustin's mouth had gone slack. She knelt at last as if she had cut her own tendons and found it a mercy. Roose Bolton had already knelt. He did it the way a man folds a coat. Ramsay did not kneel. His laugh went thin under the boughs. He opened his mouth to say another word that would have ruined something, and 5 ravens came off the elm in a blur. They did not peck his eyes. They did not need to. The laugh bled out of his mouth like steam. He stood as if someone had shaken the bones out of him, and they had fallen into the snow and forgotten his shape. Brandon Stark, Brynden said. The name felt old and new at once. The North remembers. The trees choose what the swords forget. He lifted the crown and set it not upon a brow, but upon the root that rose from the earth like a knee, and when it touched the wood it took, the way a graft takes. Red ran where it bound, and the snow hissed as if it had put its tongue on iron. "Rise," the voice in the leaves said. "Rise and remember." Men stood. They did it with shame and with pride and with that bewilderment that comes over you when you realize you have put something down you have been carrying for years without knowing it and that you are still standing. Wyman Manderley turned his face to the tree, the way a man turns his face to a hearth when he has been too long in a cold field. "Your grace," he said, and the North had a grace again. "We will fight for you." "Not for me," said the wood. "For us." "Words," Stannis said when Alysanne came back to him through snow that had learned to walk. "I asked for fealty. You bring me a story. I bring you a king the trees will obey," Alysanne said, shoulders white with the melt. "None of the men opposing you has that." Stannis's mouth went hard. "Do trees break sieges?" "Sometimes," Alysanne said. "They break men, which is the same." "The North needs swords," Stannis said. "It has swords," Alysanne answered. "It needs eyes. It has 1,000. She sat without asking leave, which was a kind of gift. "This boy will make us see, and he will make us remember. Is that enough for you, your grace?" "Never." Stannis's nature was to be unsatisfied, but he closed his fist over the map where the crooked line ran. "Yet I will not fight trees unless I must." He looked at Alysanne for a long count. "Swear this boy's fealty to me, and I will let him have his crown beneath the leaves." "It is not that sort of crown," Alysanne said, "but I will carry your words to him." "And if the trees say no?" Stannis asked. "Then winter will decide," Alysanne said, which is the only answer ever honest in the North. The North learned quickly with the old songs in its ears. Greywater spat up men with eyes painted red for seeing in snow, and they went to the fist of the first men with Tormund Giantsbane's sons and dug at the old caches where black glass had slept since the world was a boy. White Harbor's long knives shaved the glass and put it upon ash shafts, and Manderley ships took barrels of arrowheads east to Rills and west to Barrowton. Men who had never bent a bow learned to fumble a string. Old women who had not bent a bow since their wedding day taught them. The mountain clans came down, bewildered and dangerous, with skins upon their backs and teeth on their belts and stories in their mouths of cold blue men, walking in the dark between snow gusts that had no wind. Umber and Mormon and Glover and all those who had been hiding with their oaths under their tongues spat them into their palms and tried their edges once more. Bran sat in a cave and in a wood and upon a root and looked out of 1,000 eyes. At first he watched like a boy watches ants. It fascinated him to see men from far away do small, brave, or stupid things. He watched a woman he did not know go out into the snow to bring 2 wood bundles at once and cough for a week because of it. He watched a man teach his son to put fletch upon a shaft with honey when there was no glue to spare. He watched Tormund clap men on the back in a way that made them straighten their backs and laugh, though they had no right to. He watched the black gate for Hareth shy, and saw the boy sit with his feet close together. Until the dark he was not afraid and believed it for a little longer each night. Then he learned to watch as the trees wanted him to. He stopped counting men and began to count places. He felt where the snow made channels between drifts and where men could walk without being seen. And he sent men down those ways. He felt where ice had eaten a river's edge and would eat a camp if a cook spilled water there tonight. And he sent a raven to whisper that the pot should be hung from a different branch. He felt where the night was thickening like dough and where it was thinning like old cloth. And he told Mira, and Mira told Howland, and Howland told old women, and old women told boys. And the boys went to stand where the cloth was thin with black arrows in their hands. Bloodraven taught him how to leave pieces of himself in the right places, in the eyes of men who would not break when the wind shouted. "You cannot be everywhere," he said. "You can be what is needed." The others came like a slow contempt. They did not bang drums because cold does not need to sing to frighten. They walked at dusk as if dusk were their thought. The whites came first, because the dead always introduce gods. They clawed out of old graves, and out of new pure white and out of rivers, where they had been sleeping upon the bottom like weeds. Men burned them. Fire worked upon what had once been men. Dragon glass worked upon what had never been men long enough for men to give it a curse name. On a night so clear the stars could hear each other, a pack of wolves took 3 whites to bone inside a ring of ash tips, 30 paces wide. No man saw the others then, but the wolves did, and they did not like what they smelled. A white wind went over the fur, and frost bloomed in the hairs, and one wolf howled, and Bran felt it in his bones where there were none. He sent men, and those men found a dozen whites caught upon a ring of old saplings where the wind had polished the bark to bone. They burned the bodies and burned the ring, and in doing so they made a wall of smoke that could be seen from 3 villages. Behind it, the women of Barrowton led their children south one day earlier than they would have done, and so they lived. In the Barrow Fields, a place the dead liked because it told them stories, the others showed themselves. They stepped out of the shadow of a long mound and stood clear as the knife you lay upon a table. They were cold, but not the cold that takes your breath. They were the cold that waits until your breath runs slower and then counts. They did not speak. A man tries to give his fear a voice so he can answer it. The others do not need voices. They had no need of men either. They raised a hand and the snow glassed into a spear, and the spear rose on its own, and made holes in men where the blood came out steaming into webs. They would have walked through that place the way a king walks through a hall that knows his name. But Bran had seen the way the snow drifted there, and he had felt the old stones under it, and he had sent meadows full of nothing, which is to say men and women with nothing to lose but each other. The Crannogmen laid the ground like a nettle bed, black glass points rising from the snow like teeth. When the others walked, they walked into it as into a field they had not bothered to learn, and they bled light. Their spears were quick, but not quicker than a boy with a frog spear taught by a father with patient hands. If you aim for the shadow under a thing, you will hit the thing itself when it moves. Howland had told his son once. The boy had laughed then because it had sounded like a marsh riddle. He did not laugh when he drove his spear through an other's knee and felt a sound like water shattering. The thing screamed and did not make a sound, and the spear shivered back at him as if a god under the ice had expelled it. It was not victory. Victory is a word Southrons use when they want to end a song neatly. It was an hour where men did not die and an hour after it in which they died a little less. Winter accepted both with equal politeness. Ramsay Bolton died without ever admitting to himself that he was dying. He went out in the night to find the tree, and he meant to burn it, because he burned anything that said no to him. He took men. He took dogs. The dogs would not cross the God's Wood threshold. Men told him there were no thresholds in woods, only edges, and he struck one across the mouth with the flat of his knife to explain edges. He pushed between the boughs alone, finally, since he liked that kind of story about himself. Within, the snow fell straight down as if it knew where it was going. Ravens watched him with the patient interest of old scholars. He lifted the torch and the torch guttered, and when he lifted it higher, the flame lay down like a whipped dog and died. Ramsay felt the shape of himself in the dark then, and he did not like it. He turned without making a step, the way fear turns you in your skin. A figure moved between the trunks. Not a man. It moved like a man's memory. "Father," he said in the dark, "there are deaths that make a castle quieter." Men slept better the next night and did not know why. Roose Bolton did not die. He stopped. He went into a room and sat, and did not come out. When men forced the door, they found him sitting with his hands upon his knees, as if he had been waiting for someone to tell him it was time. He was not cold. He simply was not there in any way that men could rouse. Wyman Manderley went to look at him and made a small sound that might have been satisfaction, or might have been sorrow for the time he had wasted offering good salt to a man who was better by himself than with any spice. In the hall that had been burned and mended, men gathered again. They brought ash-hafted spears and stories of snow. They brought the smell of smoke in cloaks, and the look of men who had slept enough to be dangerous again. They brought a will. The crown upon the root had darkened a little where the sap dried. It did not look like a thing men had made now. It looked like something the tree had always worn and had only just revealed. Brendan Rivers stood with one hand upon it as if steadying himself and the crown together. He had grown smaller, or perhaps the gods' wood had grown. Old men shrink. Old gods do not. Stannis Baratheon will have fealty if he can find the road to it, Wyman said, always practical. He wants names he can write upon paper. He wants to count. Let him count, said the wood. Count the dead in his camp when he takes lies for truth. Count the crows over his tents when he forgets to feed the living. But count with him too, when he remembers that winter needs all its men and not just those who know what a writ is. Give him the number he asks and then the help he did not know how to ask. The voice in the leaves paused, and when it spoke again, it was more boy and less tree. I do not want the South. I want the North to stand. Maimed, and after? Palinest. Because Crannogmen do not ask for the time without knowing what you plan to do with it. After, the trees will keep standing, Bran said. After, the men who live will remember. We will bring the bones home. All of them we can find. We will use slow words when we speak of the dead, and fast hands when we feed the living. Rickon, Wyman said so softly that the name fogged and disappeared as quickly as breath in a bottle. There is still a boy. I know where he runs, Bran said, and the wolves in him stirred where a black savage pup on an island had learned to bite everything that moved. He is wild. He will not come to a call. We will not call. We will go to him with meat and old songs. We will not put a crown on him like a yoke. We will bring him home and teach him the words that do not sound like chains. Bloodraven smiled, and his mouth cut him. You have learned to be cruel to be kind. I have learned to be kind to be cruel, Bran said, and did not know which it was. The wall did not fall. It groaned. Men on its top went quiet, and then found their talk again because men always find it. The Night Fort did not swallow Hareth shy. He took to speaking to the well once a night because humbling yourself before a hole in the ground is good practice for speaking to men. Sometimes the hole spoke back in water speech that made no sound. He did not think that was mad. He thought that was what service was. He helped carry a man with a spear wound to his bed, and did it with his back and arms, and not his words, and later found his name in the raven that came to sit where the man had bled through the blanket. It said, Hareth, and he did not startle. He said, "I," and felt the wall hear him. In White Harbor they baked pies that were not jokes, and in Barrowton they buried men with their heads pointed north so the dead would know how to listen, and at the Crofters' village Stannis held because he could hold, which is a skill too precious to mock. Eliza and Mormont watched the tree in Winterfell with something like relief on her face and said to it, "We will not make you the only standing thing in this country, boy." She took a ship and went where Bran's eyes could not reach because you must send your best where you cannot see. Bran tried once to speak with Jon Snow. He found Ghost. He put his eyes into red and saw himself. Jon lay somewhere like a word unsaid. Bran wanted to say it. He did not. He was learning silence as well as speech. He put a thought into Ghost instead. Pack. Ghost raised his head where he lay and went where the snow told him and found men who needed teeth and not words. There was no true battle. There was winter. Winter fought every day, and every day the North put on its leather and went out and took a little of the fight back. The others learned that the North would step back a pace and then forward again with something black in its hands. They learned to stop walking into places where the snow lay strange. They learned to kill the men who held the words in their mouths and found that more men had those words the next day. It displeased them. They did not have faces to show displeasure with, but the tall frost laid on stones spoke of an anger that had to cling to something to learn to exist. Brendan Rivers did not see the end of it. He sat by the root with his hand upon the crown and watched a boy stand where he had once tried to stand and failed, and had been sent to stand where there were no men. He liked the boy. He liked him because the boy listened, and because he did not pretend that listening was easy. He liked him because the boy cried once at night when the cave was empty. Cried with his mouth upon his own arm to keep from waking the others. Cried because boys cry, not kings. and because kings who do not cry make maps with too many straight lines. He died in the godswood as the snow began to soften and then stiffen again, and the wind turned once more into a knife men could not name. He did not fall. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them they were bark. The crown did not change when he left it. The ravens came for him with dignity, and left bits of black upon the white for a time. Then even those went away. Later men would swear an old man with a red eye sometimes watched them from the heart tree when they tried to cheat a vow. Nobody ever cheated those vows twice. Mira left the cave when the snow allowed a path to become more than a name. She had not wanted to leave a boy she had carried too long and too far. But when she saw that the boy had become a place she knew she would be in his way if she sat upon it, she touched his shoulder. "I will come back," she said, and meant it because reeds bend and return. "Bring him home," Bran said, meaning Rickon and also meaning all the bones whose names he was learning. "If you see Arya or Sansa, tell them the tree remembers how their hair smells." Mira smiled a little on the side of her mouth. "I'll tell the tree what they say about you when I find them." She took Jojen's dreams, which were small and green and heavy, and her spear, which was long and black and light, and her brother's hand when he lifted it, and went out then, because the world outside had begun to be something a body could move through without the body betraying itself. Hodor cried. He cried like a hill collapsing softly under moss. Bran did not cry. He put his hand upon Hodor's arm and felt the big man shudder and quiet. He did not go into Hodor. He had learned not to go into men who loved him because that is a theft too large to explain. Winter remembered to end, but not before it had convinced every living thing that it would not. The days lengthened unnoticed. The snow that had been a wall became a habit. Men realized they had a day without a death and did not say it because you never say a thing like that aloud. The others did not retreat. They thinned. They became a rumor in the way that a wound becomes a scar. An old woman in an old village woke one dawn to find ice on her doorstep shaped like a hand. And later that day, a child did not wake from its nap, and the old woman did not cavil when she salted and buried the tiny body with a dozen old words, spoken slowly. There were fewer such times every season. The North did not bend its knee to Stannis Baratheon. It found a way to bow and remain standing. Stannis liked that manner of bowing less than any other, but he enjoyed that the men who made it came when he called to fight men who had forgotten the North deserved to make its own mistakes. He wrote a writ acknowledging that the godswood crown was no threat to the Iron Throne, and when he read it aloud his mouth flattened around the words, but he read all of them. The days when men came to the godswood to quarrel grew fewer. They came to speak their dead and sew up their living with slow words. They came to ask for places to plant. They came to fetch news from the tree, to know where the next drift was, where the ice was thin, where a mother pig had farrowed early. They brought nothing and took something, and they learned to call that a fair trade. Rickon Stark came home at last. He did not come the way boys ought. He came like a dog led by a girl with moss in her hair and a woman with an axe. He came with yellow eyes in the dark that had fairly learned how to live without ever learning how to like it. He stood in the godswood and smelled everything. He bared his teeth, because a smile is something men make, and boys who have run with wolves must be taught it again. Bran spoke out of the tree, and Rickon flattened his ears, and then he laughed for the first time, a raw, uncut sound that made men grin like fools, because there are few sounds rarer. He did not wear a crown, nor was he asked. He was given a knife and told how to hold it. He was given a word and told where to put it. On a day with rain soft as fish eggs, Wyman Manderley brought 3 bones home. He brought more later. He kept bringing them. He said he would not stop until the dead agreed they had enough of the living's time. Men who had once laughed at the merman's feasts came thin and clean and sat at his table and ate quietly, and did not ask what the pies were made of because they had learned to let some jokes sleep. Bran learned that seeing everything means seeing little, so he learned to choose. He watched where the river cut a new bend and moved 3 families there because their children had too much light in their eyes, and river light makes it softer. He watched where a willow leaned and fell and sent a boy with a spear to stand under it, because a white had learned to wait there. He watched where Mira built a fire and let it burn down because she liked watching the coals more than the flames, and that night he slept. When spring came, it did not announce itself. It slipped in as children do, and laughed when men turned and saw it behind them and said, "Ah, there you are." The heart tree flowered. Men never spoke of such a thing after, because the old gods have their pride. But the red that year was a kind of sunlight no one had a name for. The crown upon the root had darkened further, and it looked like bone. The ravens nested with a satisfaction that had nothing of hunger in it. One morning Bran spoke, and the sound of him was more boy than wood, and 100 little things in the gods would lean to hear better, and he said, "We are not kings of men. We are kings of memory. A man can kneel to a memory without biting his tongue. We will carry it forward until it does not need us. Then we will sit and listen." Naughty! He listened. He heard little things and large ones. He heard a laughing girl in the vale teach another girl to run faster than any boy on the mountain. He heard the slow grind of waves under the white knife, and knew which rock would turn a ship in 3 years' time, and send a boy to carve a mark so quiet you had to know where to look to find it. He heard a prayer said by a man in black, who had never liked praying and liked this one because it was short and certain. He heard his sisters' names on the wind, in 2 different directions, in 3 different tongues. He heard the faint remembered sound of his father's whetstone again, and did not look away from it this time. The north did not become a tale where nothing went wrong. Cattle died. Babies sickened. Men cheated and were caught. There were storms that tore roofs and men that tore each other worse. There were knives that forgot they were tools. There were other winters coming. There are always other winters coming. The boy at the root was not a god, and if anyone called him such, the birds laughed, and he did not begrudge them that. But when men went to the gods' wood at night and laid their hands upon the pale bark, they felt a hum in it that told them their names back to them, in a voice they did not know they missed. And when they slept, they woke with a path in their head that had not been there. They took it, and sometimes it took them. Brind and Rivers watched, from wherever old men who had served too many kings, and had finally learned to serve something older go when their duty lets them put down their swords. Perhaps he watched from under a root. Perhaps he watched from the black in a raven's eye. Once in a while when the wind was high, men would swear the heart tree turned its face only so much as a degree, and the red eye in the old face seemed to light. When that happened, men remembered their manners and took off their hats. No one taught them that. They learned it by living. Snow came again, as it always does, and the north did not panic. It put on its leather and checked its black arrowheads and baked its pies and set its nets and kissed its children without making a noise of it. In the cave beneath the hill, where the stone sweat star water and the old bones lay with their crosses of black wood, a boy's handprint bled red on the root where a crown had knit itself. A slow curling fume rose there in winter and smelled like rain and leaves. You could not bottle it or buy it or sell it. You could only breathe it, which is to say you could only live. Sometimes men gathered when the light went and told the tale of the day the trees crowned a king. They spoke of the old man's red eye and the snow going sideways and the way their own knees had bent before their pride had decided to allow it. They told it without titles, because titles are what you give when you have not found the right name. They called him the King of Greenseers, and some smiled when they said it because it sounded like nonsense, and others did not smile, because nonsense is sometimes the only thing that saves you. They told the tale. They slept. They woke with their names in their mouths, and went out into the snow to say them. And the north, which had learned long ago to tell its stories slowly, added this one to the long, low singing it makes beneath the wind.